Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. I see some familiar names here in the attendees. It's great to have you here. Regarding this webinar that you're about to watch, we have pre-recorded it earlier today. The reason is because of global internet problems, because of the current pandemic. We wanted to have it in the best quality possible. So we are here listening in with you, and we will be here with the during the Q&A session as well. So please, you can write down your questions during the webinar, and we will be here to answer at the end. We apologize for any of the choppy sound during the webinar, because even with the recording, still the internet is problematic, but bear with us. And again, thank you very much for joining. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Code Reuse Analysis with Mirai. This is a webinar which is based on the blog post we recently published by myself and Paul Litvak. This is a pre-recorded webinar. We're recording it a few hours before the broadcast. This is because of worldwide internet issues, and we of course want you to get the best quality of the recording as possible. And we will have a live Q&A session after this. Please stay tuned and write down any questions that you have, and we'll be happy to answer after. Just a quick introduction. I'm Shaul, and I work as a sales engineer at Intezer for the past years. I have experience in cybersecurity from the IDF, the Israeli Army, and also I worked at a company called Verint. And here at Intezer, I work in collaboration with the sales team and provide a technical aspect of the sales process. With me is Paul Litvak.
Hi, guys. Yeah. Hi, guys. Nice to have you here. I'm Paul. I'm a reverse engineer here at Intezer. I was previously a developer with specializing in cloud infrastructure in the IDF intelligence course. And now I'm here at Intezer.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Good to have you here. So we'll start with just going over quickly on the agenda. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what is signature-based detection. Then we're going to talk about a specific case of signature evasion that Paul found and how that works. We're going to talk about specifically string obfuscation and also show a live demonstration of how you take a detected malware and make it into a fully undetected sample. We're going to explain how genetic malware analysis works, our own technology here, and how it stands up against these types of techniques. And stay tuned, we have a very important announcement about
a little surprise.
Yeah, a little surprise. And lastly, we're going to demonstrate a really cool new system that we have in Intezer Protect and how that really connects with everything we're going to talk about. So let's begin.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So string-based detection, signature-based detection, sorry, is I would say the most basic thing you can do in order to detect malware. And it has been used from really since the 80s, when antiviruses really started to be relevant. And it works in a very simple way. Generally, you can divide the detection and analysis of malware into two main categories, static and dynamic. Generally, this means that static analysis and detection doesn't require executing the file or sample, and dynamic analysis does require execution. And signature-based detection, of course, is relevant to the static detection part, the static analysis part. And the way it works is by looking at specific artifacts within a file or within network traffic, within
an endpoint's memory, and based on those static features and artifacts, basically detecting whether this is malicious or not. And this is all, of course, based on pre-made and predetermined rules and signatures that you can design. We will focus on static signature detection here and show the inherent weaknesses of that type of detection mechanism. How does it work generally? And this will be very oversimplified, but if you have questions about that, of course, we'll be happy to answer. Let's say we have a binary file and we expect that file to have some patterns that we can find again and again in different variants. And these patterns can be, and usually are, textual in nature. For instance, system commands, IP addresses or URLs, or names of functions, libraries, etc. By searching for these textual values, you will be able to detect in the very basic way different malware samples. For instance, let's say you have a malware sample that has a hard-coded IP address which it connects to. If you look for that IP address within the file, you will be able to determine whether this is that malware or not. But of course, if that IP address changes in the next variant, or if any piece of data there which the signature is based on changes, the signature will no longer be relevant. And you will have to update the signature. And as long as you have the old signature, you will remain compromised by that specific attack. So at this point, I want to pass the torch to Paul, so we can explain about a specific story of how he found an evasive malware which was able to escape the detection of common signatures. Paul?
Yeah, hi guys. So actually this whole thing started when I found, when I had a hit on one of my VT hunting rules for a Mirai sample. I usually hunt for botnet samples to see if there's any sort of new actor using them. And when I do this, I usually check what other files the attacker deployed, like whether they deployed some scripts or some useful artifacts for adding context to the attack and the deployment of the tool. And what I noticed is that this attacker specifically uploaded 3 more files which were barely detected. And from the file name, from the first file name, we could immediately see this is a Mirai bot. And it also included the compiler version used. And we can see on the second file, it's really strange because this seems to be like the same Mirai sample. It's just opposite. What does that mean? Well, after looking into the file, we saw that there was some some differences in the strings, but nothing really extreme. And this really surprised me because it seems like to bypass the detections, it's really easy. All you need to do is change some strings, and it probably escapes the YARA rules of vendors specifically for Linux detections. Next slide. So the string obfuscation itself is just a really simple encoding. This is rot1. It means you rotate the string by 1 according to their ASCII value. For example, A becomes B, B becomes C, C, D, and so on. So essentially, the attacker just changed the order the strings are, the way the strings are printed, and it's all it took to lower the detections from 24 to 1 detection. Now, you can see the attacker deployed 2 more samples, and the reason for this is in the second sample, the one with the 1 detection, he forgot to decode the obfuscated string. So essentially, the program didn't work. He passed on encoded strings for the open system call and for other values where it expected the original string. So the attacker compiled a third version, which had 6 detections, but why did it go up from 1 to 6? So the reason for this is that the attacker actually forgot to strip the binary from function names, and the 4th binary we really see him completely stripping the binary. We now have decoding in place. The strings are obfuscated. It's complete, and there's 0 detections for this binary. And it was really just this easily implemented. Just add simple string obfuscation, strip the binary, and voila, 0 detections for a Mirai botnet. And this is one of the most, I think this is the most common botnet there is currently.
Definitely. And Paul, just a question regarding what we saw in VirusTotal. So the attacker really uploaded different versions to test whether they will be detected, right? So trying to get to a fully undetected sample.
Yes, and actually this was all done in 30 minutes. As you can see in the timestamp, if you go back to the left slide.
Yes, let's do that.
You can see on the first scene here on the right side, you can see the upload date. So from 1:09 to 1:45 minutes, it's all it took him to create this fully undetected binary. This easy.
And is this a common technique that you see using VirusTotal to make sure that you're undetected?
Yes, we see it in the Windows binaries. We also see APTs doing this. Everybody does that because they want to know how well their vendors, how well their malware fares against vendors. They always risk detection by people with anti-grouses, but there's no other way to know if your binary will be easily detected once it is a computer, which might be protected with a AV product.
Yeah, it's basically a very simple way to look at all of the vendors, what they're saying, and whether they detect you. And I heard also that there are anonymous versions of these types of solutions like VirusTotal, right?
Yeah.
That attackers can use?
Of course.
Interesting, because of course, when you upload this to VirusTotal, you have the risk of Paul detecting you and releasing a blog about it.
Yeah, that's the disadvantage of other platforms is that they have less vendors scanning them.
Yeah, super interesting. So just to reiterate, the attacker here took a Mirai sample, which is widely detected. And of course, widely detected is, it really depends, because when you see Linux detection, it's generally very low.
I mean, yeah, 24 detection for Linux malware is really impressive. I mean, you usually have, I usually work with malware, which is, I call them detected when they have like nine detections or 8 detections. 24 is really a lot. It's like some very common Yara signature or something which the vendors use to detect.
And basically, by just obfuscating the strings, and also obfuscating is a big word for that, just rotate the letters and stripping the function names, you actually reach 0 detections. So thank you, Paul, for the description. And also, if you're interested, people watching, we have a blog post about this, so you can also read about it and see the actual samples. We have links to everything, of course. So as we saw earlier, the only changes here were of the strings. And we want to show you how this affects, or how genetic malware analysis, our technology handles this kind of obfuscation. So just a quick word about the technology and how it works. If you were not familiar with Intezer Analyze and genetic malware analysis, our basic assumption is that code is evolutionary. So you will see code reuse between different versions of software and malware. No one writes new variants from scratch. They take what they already have and change it, update it according to their need. And actually, within the technology, we don't really look at strings as relevant detection artifacts. We look at the code itself. So if we remove from the equation, as you can see here, the code is absolutely the same. And to just buttress this point, let's see how this looks like in Intezer Analyze. So these are screenshots of the first pair of samples we saw. So as you can see on the top left, we have 24 detections on VirusTotal, and in Intezer, we just give you a Mirai classification based on the code. So we have 89 genes. Genes is the basic unit that we look at, which is just a series of a binary code, which we classify based on where we've seen before that code. And on the bottom right, you have this, the sample after string obfuscation with one detection on VirusTotal and the same exact code classification for Intezer. Just an important note, we're not trying to diss VirusTotal or vendors generally. We're just wanting that we want to describe the basic inherent flaws of signature-based detection. Signatures generally are great at detecting known threats, and we just focus on the unknown and more advanced threats. And regarding the second pair, you can see, again, 6 detections on the left. We have full detection and classification of the code. And at the bottom right, we have 0 detections, fully undetected malware, and again, classified code very similarly. I just want to quickly jump to the analysis itself so we can just show you a bit more details. So let me just change the screen share. And I'm now in Intezer Analyze. You can see that this file is classified as malicious and as Mirai specifically. And you saw in the presentation that we had a different amount of genes between the one with 6 detections and this file that has 0 detections. Paul, can you maybe elaborate a bit about why we have a different amount of genes here?
Gladly. The reason is that the attacker decided to statically compile his binary, probably to make the variant, the binary, more portable, because you would rather ship libc view rather than depend on the attacked system's libraries. Also, you make life harder for reverse engineers by shipping it in the binary, because then if you strip the binary, then the reverse engineer has to figure out what those system libraries are, have to spend more time reversing. And you can see actually on the screen, you see the libstd, C++, and libc. Those are the libraries which are statically linked to the file. You can see them on that platform.
Interesting. So as Paul said, the difference here is dynamic linking and static linking. This is just the method of how you use libraries in this case. And the previous file, which had a smaller amount of genes, just didn't have those library pieces of code compiled within the same binary. It just called them dynamically without having them compiled with it. And additionally, as Paul said, not only to just have the malware more portable, but also this is used to make the life of the researcher harder. And this is just very easily demonstrated here how Intezer Analyze really just doesn't care about this change. And we still focus on the malicious code. Regardless of the libraries, we just show you, hey, we have libstdc++ here being used, but this is the code which is interesting. This is where you should focus. And of course, you can dive in, see more information, but you can see that in our other webinars. So let's go back to the presentation. So now I'm going to hand the screen off to Paul, who will show you how this can be done in a live fashion, taking a piece of malware which is known and turning it into a fully undetected sample. So
just a small caveat: do not do this at home. Malware at home.
Of course. So Paul, the screen is yours.
All right. So I prepared I downloaded from the internet the source code of a botnet named Light Hydra. It was actually used back in 2012, one of the earlier botnets there are for Linux. And I think its source code was leaked in 2014 or 2015, and we're going to see how we can easily make the change the strings there and completely bypass AV detections on VirusTotal. So on the left side of the screen here, I'll zoom in here. We're going to compile Light Hydra, a vanilla one. This is the source code. You can see some evil-looking file names such as attack, hide, scan, and inside those files you can actually see there are some really mean-looking strings. Scanner continuing to pwn, possible vulnerability, default password. These are all strings which you can easily create a signature-based detection. So let's build this, and we have it here in the bin directory, and we're just going to give it a proper name, Light Hydra Vanilla. Now this is done. Let's go to our second screen, and we'll go to the Light Hydra version which I built, which just has simply all its strings, actually most of its strings obfuscated. And we'll take a look at the source code again at the scan C function, and we can see that this is where the strings actually were once, and we're just applying a simple obfuscation to them. Just like the Mirai sample, we use rot1. We rotate every character once to the right, and we decode it at runtime with the D function, which we can see here. All it does is just -1, just rotate it back to its place. So this is really basic. Here I'll actually look at another file just to show you further proof, and you can see here more strings are encoded. So let's compile this as well, and it should be in the bin directory, and let's move this to the other directory where the vanilla is, and we'll call it Light Hydra string obfuscated. Okay. Also, unlike our Mirai attacker, we won't forget to strip it, so the function names are removed. All right, so we'll actually also strip the vanilla to show the further point, just to prove it further, and we'll now upload it to VirusTotal. So, as you can see here, hold on. Yeah, as you can see here, we actually got only 5 detections for this sample. This is pretty basic. We'll actually now look at the obfuscated variant, and we can see that it received only, it received 0 detections. So this was really easy. Just remove the strings, and you're completely undetected. And the reason for the low amount of detections here for the original Light Hydra sample is, as I said earlier, Linux malware usually comes low detected. Even public botnets which are widely available, they won't have a lot of detections because AVs don't pay as much attention to Linux, because it really makes sense, because Linux malware is really less popular than Windows. But we can see this trend is now changing with the advance of cloud servers, and more servers are hosting Linux operating systems.
And Paul, could you also show maybe how this looks like now at Intezer Analyze if you upload that?
Yeah, actually, let's take a look at our plugin as well. So first of all, let's upload this. And once we upload it to Analyze, we can actually use actually open it in IDA. And
just to also emphasize that you saw now that Paul analyzed the same file in Intezer Analyze, and still the detection does not change. We have 50 genes that are classified, regardless of the strings that were obfuscated. And now we're going to show also how this looks like in IDA Pro.
Yeah. So here we're calling our plugin, and we really want to see what changed. So a plugin enables us to see what code stayed the same and what blocks changed between older samples. So we can see this function is labeled as light Hydra. However, there is only this one block which is unique. And the reason for that is, as you can see here, this is an obfuscated, an encoded string, and it goes through a decoding mechanism here. And the compiler actually optimized it really well, so it looks a little bit hectic, see with all those scary constants. But all this does really is just decrement one, does a rotate it once to the left. So we can see, we can easily find which blocks were changed, and we can easily reverse this sample with like this.
Yeah. Also, just to reiterate here, the plugin that Paul used is a part of the Intezer Analyze product. Of course, reverse engineering is a very difficult task, which only the extremely professional people like Paul and the rest of our research team can do. And doing this requires a lot of manual labor, a lot of work, and searching and going over the code manually. And what the plugin does is just automatically grab the information from Intezer Analyze and shows you that in the context of IDA Pro. So you can see the each block, each function and its classification. And just by double clicking, you can see the actual code. And as Paul showed very clearly, you can see that the functions itself did not change, was still classified. And there was one block which was changed, which was the obfuscated string. And that doesn't affect our classification or our detection. On the opposite, actually, you can see the things that changed between different versions without any diminished classification and detection. So just going back here, as I mentioned before, we have a very important announcement. So the plugin we just showed is so far has only been available to our enterprise paying customers. And it has been very successful in providing accelerated reverse engineering. We hear from our customers all the time that instead of going over and analyzing a file for days and weeks, they can finish an analysis within minutes. And I keep hearing all the time from our community users, why don't you have that for the community? And you know what? You're right. So we want to announce now that we are going to release very soon a new version of the plugin specifically for the. So whoever is using the solution for free in the community version, you will very soon have the capability of actually using the IDA Pro plugin. So
just have to say this is a beta version, and this is not an April Fool's. It was a convenient date.
Exactly. Yeah. So don't worry about it. It's not a prank. Please contact research@intezer.com. Just write down that you're interested in trying out the plugin, and you will be the first to.
Yeah, and we would really like to hear your feedback about it. We're currently going to publish it exclusively to some people, and we would like to offer you guys the opportunity to help us provide us some feedback about this plugin, which we're going to release. So we'd really love to hear, we'd really like you to join us publishing this plugin.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. And we will have a press release specifically giving more information, but generally, once you have the plugin and you install it, you just need to analyze the file in Intezer, then open it in IDA, run the plugin, and that's it. So we're really excited about it. Hope you are too. Okay. Now, so we saw a cool example of how you take a piece of malware, which is detected and known, and by just changing a few strings, obfuscating them very easily, you achieve a fully undetected status within the biggest vendors. And as Paul mentioned, Linux malware is quite disregarded today within the large vendors, and people are mostly focused on Windows malware. And that is basically understandable because Windows malware are very prevalent for desktop users. Almost everyone uses Windows as their primary operating system. But Linux actually is much heavily used, specifically in servers, in cloud infrastructures, etc. And malware doesn't disregard that. So we are seeing a lot of new malware targeting cloud infrastructures, which are primarily based on Linux. And that's why we released quite recently a new solution called Intezer Protect. And that solution actually is based on the same technology, genetic malware analysis, which, as you saw just now, supports Windows PEs, Linux ELF files, so it can really work cross-platform. The Protect solution is based on a very simple concept. We know that any cyber attack, in the end, will have to involve some code being executed in memory in order to carry out any malicious activity. So regardless of the attack vector, if the attack was successful, meaning that all of the security solutions to that point have failed, you have to run code in order to carry out the attack. Once you run code, you can't really escape detection from Intezer Protect because we just look at the code, we classify it as you saw earlier, and provide you with the detection. The way the architecture of the system works is very simple. We have a sensor installed on any Linux machine, which is part of the cloud infrastructure, and it monitors every new code execution that is running on the machine. So whenever we see a new code being executed, we send it to analysis in our cloud system, analyze the code, and based on classification, provide you with either just visibility to the trusted code which is currently running, or provide you with an alert about malicious code which is running, or just unknown or unauthorized code which is suddenly running in the organization. This really provides unprecedented visibility and alerting capabilities on Linux infrastructures. So I will now just show you a live demo of that solution. So I'll just switch the share here again. And what you can see now is just a demo environment of Intezer Protect, and you're seeing the dashboard. So we are only monitoring 5 assets here. Each asset is just a Linux machine, which is currently running, specifically on AWS. We support other platforms as well, of course. And what you see here is full visibility to the code which is currently running and the code which was previously executed. So I can click here, see the history of the code and the code which is currently running. I can see for each process or module that is running, where it's running, a little bit of information about it. And also we have the ability to see a full genetic analysis in Intezer Analyze. So I will now take a version of the Light Hydra sample that Paul showed. I will just log in to one of the monitored servers here. And I have the sample here in the directory. and I will execute it. So basically what happens when I execute, of course, the malware loads to memory and starts its activity. And as I mentioned, at the moment of execution, we monitor the execution, we grab the file, analyze it, and you can see that immediately you get a detection. So first, you have one infected asset. You also see here on the bottom right that 12 seconds ago, we had a new execution, which is malicious. And on the top right, you have information about the alert itself. So you get an alert because malware has been executed. And let's see what type of information you get. And again, just to remind you, this is the obfuscated version, which is undetected in any other signature-based solution. So you get information about the asset itself, which server is this infecting, information about the file itself, which executed this threat. I can also jump to Intezer Analyze and see the analysis as you've seen it before. 0 detections on VT, but 50 genes are classified as light Hydra. And you get all the rest of the information here, string reuse, etc. So if you want to investigate further, you are more than welcome to. And here in Protect, you can also see the process tree. Of course, I executed the file dynamically from a bash shell. So you can see that the parent process is bash, which is trust, and you have the full path of the light Hydra sample. And the information, lastly, on the process itself, process ID, parent process ID, the command line, etc. Now, the malware is still running. So what do you say about terminating it? I just clicked on terminate process, and immediately the process has been killed. And this is the initial response that you can get. Of course, from an incident response standpoint, you would also want to look at where the file came from, who executed it, and why. If this was an application server, maybe you have a vulnerability in the application, or maybe someone stole your credentials and logged in and executed it like I just did. So just by closing the alert now, I can go back to the dashboard, and again, my environment is clean. So this is Intezer Protect. The solution was just released recently, so you can contact us as well if you want to get more information about the solution, or if you have any questions. So to summarize, we talked about what is a signature-based detection, how that works, and how generally that is. And we showed the inherent flaws of that paradigm. We were able to find, as Paul mentioned and demonstrated, an attacker which used VirusTotal and the accompanying vendors in order to make sure that detection is non-existent. We also showed how that is not really, doesn't affect Intezer Analyze because of genetic malware analysis technology. And Paul demonstrated how that can be done so easily, and he showed the live environment, a live demo of that. Lastly, we also showed you an example of how that can work in live Linux environments using Intezer Protect. And of course, don't forget about the important announcement about the IDA Pro plugin. Please feel free to contact us at research@intezer.com in order to join the beta program. And of course, if you have any questions, any issues, contact us at contact@intezer.com, or you can also follow us on Twitter at Intezer Labs. Right after this recording, we will have a live Q&A session, so please stick around, and myself and Paul will be happy to answer any question that you might have. Thank you again for joining. Be safe, be healthy, and have a great day.
Okay, here we are. Thank you everyone for listening. This is Shaul here, live. I hope you can hear me well. We have a few questions.
Let me say hello as well.
Hey, Paul.
Hi.
So we have a few questions. I'll start with the first one. And of course, feel free in the Q&A in the bottom to keep writing questions if you have any. So we have a first question. Could you explain what your experience of false positives is and how you keep them low? So that's a great question, actually. And generally, false positives work differently in Intezer as opposed to behavior-based solutions and signature-based. So for instance, if you have a signature and you sign a specific piece of information as malicious, and that piece incidentally appears in a trusted file, you will get a false positive. And the same happens with behavior. If you classify a specific activity as malicious, and you have that in a trusted file as well. In Intezer, false positives can occur if we see a code connection in a trusted file, let's say, that so far we have only seen in malware. So how does that work? So there is always a connection between malware and trusted software, and that connection is libraries. So for instance, if you have a piece of malware that wants to establish a secure connection to the CNC, for instance, they can use OpenSSL in order to encrypt the channel. And OpenSSL can be used for legitimate purposes as well. So what will happen if we collect a lot of data, index it in our database, data from malware that use OpenSSL, and then one day analyze a piece of trusted code that also uses OpenSSL. What will happen is that we will see a small malicious connection based on that reuse library. What we do in order to mitigate that is also index a lot of trusted code. You could see some of that in Protect because most of the code there is trusted. And when we index trusted code, any overlap between malware and trusted software becomes what we call common. So the genes are labeled as common and are removed from the equation, similar to what I showed earlier with the libraries. So of course, it is a matter of collecting and adding new code all the time, which we do, which also makes false positives quite rare. So I hope that answers the question. Please feel free to add more questions below. I have another question here. Someone asks, what is a gene? Or I'll say that, how do you define a gene? So that's a really good question. I will also try to limit myself, of course, to protect our IP. But a gene is a sequence of assembly instructions. Size-wise, it is larger than a single basic block and smaller than a function. And it also should carry out some logical action based on our thresholds. And as you saw, actually, in a live demo earlier, we remove any strings or function names, variable names, etc. So the gene goes through an abstraction layer in order to be able to detect the same code in different instances, different compilations, architectures, etc. Another question, which is quite interesting. We have a question about what do you do about more complex obfuscation? So as you know, you saw how we obfuscate very simply only the strings and reach a fully undetected malware. And to be honest, that's usually the extent of what attackers will do. So that isn't really a problem for us. There are far more complex obfuscation techniques, theoretically. So you can change the way the code looks like every time you execute. That is very rare. And also there is a huge trade-off to the attacker. This means that the payload will be huge in memory because it needs to change and elaborate the code during execution. So it will be very hard to fly under the radar. And also, if you do that with Intezer, you will get a fully unique payload. Of course, given that all of the code is changed, which is very rare. So also a fully unique payload.
Yeah, I'd like to add, which we usually see actors doing this, and we actually just now posted a blog post by our researcher Michael Kajilot, where he analyzes samples which try to obfuscate their code, and then they unpack it into real time. So what we see actually is attackers build like this kind of really polymorphic code, which does change and does yield unique genes. And after executing it dynamically, the payload, the real malware, is actually put into memory, and that's where we collect it. Our platform also
Detected,
allows
I guess.
window
Sorry, Paul, you
dynamic.
were cut off.
What was I cut off? I think we lost Shaul. Yeah. So he just said that I was cut off. Yeah. So this is why we recorded. We're having real issues with the internet. So I'll take over.
I'm back. Can you hear me, guys?
Oh, okay. I thought I was the one who was cut off.
And I thought you were the one cut off as well until I was
always
thrown out
always
of the
blame me.
So just to understand, did you finish answering the question?
I hope so. Yeah, I don't remember. I was interrupted. Yeah, well, just to recap really quick, what we see is malware deploying a middle layer where they unpack the code, and the unpacker itself is usually unique and has all kinds of changing code. And then we see the real malware, which is usually the same agent Tesla, TrickBot, whatever.
Great. And I thought I was answering previously, but then I was thrown out. So now I'm on my hotspot. So, you know, we gotta find a way. So the question was, can you detect a new tailored malware that has no known genes? So what I was saying is that there is a flaw in the question, because even if you have a new tailored malware, it will have genes that have been used before, because code reuse is relevant even to the most advanced nation-sponsored threats. You won't see a fully newly written threat every day, and if you do, we can index that, and then they will have to write their entire code from scratch again. So we have many instances that we were able to detect new and undetected threats, especially in Linux, but also in Windows, based on older code that was used. We have a great example with WannaCry from a while ago. We have a really cool example of PureLocker that reused the evasion function. So they reused the evasion code in order to evade, but ironically, we detected that function from a previous variant. So I hope that answers. Another question, at which point in time after execution starts, does Intezer Protect analysis begin, or does it do it once or continuously? Great question. We have a sensor on each machine, each VM, and we monitor the execution at all times. And at the moment, immediately at execution, as you saw in the demo, we analyze the file or the code in memory. Of course, if you have the same code or the same hash of the file, etc., with no change, we don't need to analyze it again. We can get it from cache. But yes, the analysis is done continuously and all the time. Another question. Do you use any sort of dynamic analysis? And no, you didn't miss that. We didn't mention that, but that's also a really good question. We do use dynamic analysis for one reason only. So the analysis itself is always static. So we analyze the code statically without any execution. The reason we sometimes need to execute the file is only for unpacking purposes. So many malware variants today, we can say most of them even, arrive with some sort of packing technique. This means that the file on disk may look benign or look even trusted, but once the code is executed, the file will unpack a malicious payload from itself and load it into memory. and the code in memory will be completely different than the file on the disk. So understandably, if we look at the file statically, we won't be able to see that malicious payload. So what we do specifically with the Intezer Analyze, when you upload a specific file, is detect whether the file is packed using a variety of tests. And once we determine that the file is or could be packed, we detonate it in a sandbox, but only for unpacking purposes. So we don't look at the behavior, we don't look at network traffic, etc. We just wait for the file to unpack itself, load its code to memory, and once it does that, we just dump the module's code and analyze it statically as well, showing the full result in Analyze. So you can go to analyze.intezer.com right now to examples, and you will have an example there of unpacking.
I
Okay.
just want to add, other dynamic execution engines usually run the dynamic execution and then apply some sort of Yara to realize the second module or the third module, whatever, after the unpacking has been done. But we only extract the code from the unpacking. We do not run any signature-based scans. We just take the code and look at it as is, and we immediately see what connections do we generate from it.
Great. Another question. I love these questions. What kind of files is Intezer able to process? So that's also a very relevant question. As you can understand, we analyze code. So any binary file which is executable, so that means PE files, whether they're native or non-native, so including .NET, Visual Basic, etc. 64-bit, 32-bit, and also ELF files, including ARM files, 32-bit, 64-bit, and also APK applications for Android, we can analyze. Additionally, if you have any installers, we can unpack them statically and analyze the containing files. But important to note, we don't support document files, so doc, PPT, PDF, RTF, etc. And also, we don't support scripts currently, but that is in our roadmap. Why don't we do that? Because it is inherently not related to the technology. And also philosophically, maybe we can say, documents are mostly the delivery mechanism for malware. And we are involved, as you can see, in a later stage of the attack, mostly in the investigation, detection, response, and we let the email gateways do their work with documents. So I hope that answers regarding the file formats we support. Another question, can you detect all types of ransomware so far? Well, I don't know if anyone knows about all ransomware out there, but we are great at detecting ransomware, actually. So there are many different ransomware families that we've seen and we have in our database. And the great thing is that they share code with each other. So for instance, you have the great example of GandCrab and Sodinokibi, which share code with each other. And you can see that in Intezer and different versions of WannaCry, of Robinhood ransomware. So we're really good at ransomware, PureLocker, which I mentioned before. And also, we even found ransomware for Linux, which is quite rare. So check out our blogs. Go to the blog page in intezer.com. Find in the page the word ransomware. You'll see a lot of information there. Anything to add, Paul?
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, so I think this was a great experience, even though we were disconnected once. So it's good. I'm happy that we decided to pre-record this. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Paul. And
thank you, Shaul.
thank you. And thank you, everyone who were involved here. And again, as I said in the recording, everyone, be safe, be healthy. And again, thank you for being with us. And feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions, if we missed anything here, or if you want to try out the product. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you guys for listening. Bye-bye.